Eustace Mullins, Curse of Canaan. Chapter 9, The World Wars. Albert Pike had promised his Masonic allies in Europe that they would have 3 world wars to consolidate the world power of the Canaanites. We have now seen 2 of those world wars, and, as promised, the First World War was to set up a communist regime, the Second World War was to raise it to the status of a world power, and the Third World War is planned to destroy both communism and Christianity in a great orgy of annihilation. This coming war is intended to be the final death knell of the people of Shem. After its conclusion, the Canaanites will reign unchallenged throughout the world. The 2 world wars which have already taken place in the 20th century have been nothing more than wars of extermination, as proven by the fact that most of the onslaught has been directed against women and children. The millions of young men of Shem who have been killed in these wars did not have an opportunity to marry and begin families. All of this was done according to the plan of the Canaanites. Working behind the scenes for many years to place their agents in positions of guidance and power in the various nations of the world, they have been able to carry out their own designs, often in direct violation of the interests of the nations which they have infiltrated. Of all countries, this has been most true of the United States. It is difficult to think of a single act of foreign policy in the past 50 years which the Washington agencies have directed as a benefit to the American people. By achieving dominant roles in all factions and parties in the United States, the Canaanites have faced no serious opposition in planning and executing their programs. As a result, the wars and revolutions of the 20th century have been nothing more than great celebrations before the image of Baal, large-scale human sacrifices in such numbers as the world has never seen. The emphasis on the massacres of women and children are 20th century updated observances of the child murders and immolation of women which marked the festivals of Baal more than 3,000 years ago. This will come as a shock to those scholars who have labored patiently for decades in the hopes of finding some logical explanation of the 2 past world wars, some economic or political cause which they have sought as a prospector might patiently toil through the arid hills of the West, seeking the lost Dutchman's mine. The lost Dutchman's mine has not been found, neither have the scholars discovered any logical cause of World War I and World War II. Let us, then, attempt to end their quest, and allow them respite. In the Boer War, for the first time in a war conducted by a major European power, the British used concentration camps, starvation and disease as the crucial weapons to subdue the enemy. These atrocities were directed by Sir Alfred Milner, a Rothschild agent who had founded the Round Tables which later became the Council on Foreign Relations. The stakes were high. The Rothschilds needed the enormous capital represented by the gold and diamond riches of South Africa to finance their final drive for world power. Because of these riches, South Africa remains one of the world's principal areas of contention today. The furor about apartheid and racial problems provides a convenient cover for the real struggle of the Rothschilds to protect their diamond holdings, De Beers, and their gold hoard, Anglo-American Corporation. The Rothschilds have also managed to pick up a few $billion by speculating in the South African rand. Due to their worldwide media campaign, they drove the rand down from $1.45 to 25 cents. The Babylonian monetary system relies on a strong central government, that is, a non-representational Oriental despotism, which in turn is dependent on its continual financing by a strong central bank. The central bank exercises power by obtaining a monopoly on the entire money and credit of the people. It then uses this power to loot the nation through enormous expenditures. The Rothschilds established central banks throughout Europe, as one of the plums which fell to them after their victory over Napoleon. They then programmed these central banks to launch the nations of Europe on a costly and ruinous, arms race, even though no nation in Europe had any plans for attacking any other nation. It was a time of continuous peace. By the year 1886, it was apparent that these nations could no longer survive these enormous expenditures. They must either collapse into internal revolution, or embark on full-scale external war. The European economies staggered on for nearly 3 decades, with no relief in sight. These were the years, we might recall, which have been termed the golden years of Europe. Art, music, and cultural institutions flourished in spite of the Canaanite conspiracies. However, it was soon to be thrown on the block. The way out of their dilemma was granted by a curious American, of undefined origins, a Boer academic who convinced the bankers of Wall Street that he was their man. Woodrow Wilson was elected president, and he signed the Federal Reserve Act into law. A few months later, World War I was underway. During the years immediately preceding the World War, there was a continuous outflow of emigrants from Europe to the United States. They had found that, the golden years, were not golden for those who had no gold. The masters of the order, the Canaanites, floated from country to country and from great estate to great estate on a sea of champagne, but for most Europeans, life was brutal and short. They did not flee the good life, they were searching for it. At a millionaires' club on Jekyll Island, Georgia, in November 1910, the problem of financing a world war was resolved. Paul Warburg, of Kuhn, Loeb Company, and Henry P. Davison, of J. P. Morgan Company met with Senator Nelson Aldrich, after whom Nelson Rockefeller was named, to secretly draft a plan for an American central bank. 75 years later, it is impossible to find any establishment scholar or historian who has ever heard of the Jekyll Island meeting. They earn their comfortable salaries by concealing from the public what has taken place. The people of Shem had always opposed a central bank, fearing its power over them. Now the congressmen, led by Congressman Charles A. Lindbergh, S.R., waged a gallant struggle against the power of Wall Street money. The Wall Street money won. On December 23, 1913, a significant year in Masonry, Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act into law. The American people were now poised for a great roller coaster ride, up and down from depression to prosperity and back again, and from World War to World War. The actual planning for the outbreak of World War I had been in operation for some years. The fuse was to be lit by the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His murder was carried out at Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. Within a few weeks, the nations of Europe were at war. Surprisingly enough, the approaching fate of the Archduke had been widely known for some time to European politicians, including the Archduke himself. Cassel's The World War, p. 45, quotes Count Ottokar Czernin, the Austrian foreign minister. A fine quality of the Archduke was his fearlessness. He was quite clear that the danger of an attempt to take his life would always be present, and he often spoke quite simply and openly of such a possibility. A year before the outbreak of war, he informed me that the Freemasons had resolved to kill him. This is not as startling a revelation as it may seem. The Masonic Order of Canaanites has always relied upon murder and assassination as the key elements in its march to world power. Many royal heads have fallen before their lust for vengeance. On July 11, 1914, Horatio Bottomley published in John Bull a document obtained from the Serbian legation in London, dated April 14, 1914, which was found to be in crude Spanish, and which was decoded to reveal an offer of £2,000 for eliminating Ferdinand. Professor R. W. Seton Watson, in his book, Sarajevo, p. 127, notes that, crude Spanish is really the dialect employed by the Jews of Salonika, and that the man who hawked this document round several London newspaper offices and was eventually accepted by the sensation-loving Bottomley, was a Salonican Jew. This suggests some connection with the Committee for Union and Progress, which had centered in the Jewish lodges of Salonika until the expulsion of the Turks 18 months previously. and whose course was actively hostile to Serbia. R.T. Honorable W. F. Bailey, in his book, Jews of the War Zone, p. 227, notes that, the Jews of Bosnia are named Spanilo. C. H. Norman notes in, A Searchlight on the World War, p. 42, that, the originals were worded in Spanish. It is within the writer's knowledge, as he was connected with an endeavor to form an English Lodge of the Grand Orient, from which he withdrew on learning of the real nature of this confederacy against European safety, that the language used by the Polish Department of the Grand Orient for communication with its agents in the Balkans is Spanish. Ambassador Gerard, in his book, My 4 Years in Germany, p. 137, notes, I was able to converse with some Serbians in the first days of the war in their native tongue, which, curiously enough, was Spanish. In fact, the language was not Spanish, but a language defined in the Encyclopedia Judaica as Ladino, also known as Latino, a Judeo-Spanish spoken and written language of Jews of Spanish origin after expulsion in 1492 by Ferdinand and Isabella. The execution of Ferdinand may have been a symbolic revenge for this historic event. Ed. The Encyclopedia Judaica notes various forms of Ladino, Oriental Ladino, spoken in Constantinople and Smyrna, and Western Ladino, spoken in Salonika, Bosnia, and Serbia. Many of the refugees from Spain settled in Serbia, where they ever afterward conversed in their private tongue, Western Ladino. Potts's book, Black Hand over Europe, notes of a Mr. Stevens, who spoke Spanish, whose job was to shoot the murderers at Sarajevo after they had performed the assassination, so that they could not reveal the plot. These revelations bear out the insistence of Albert Pike to Mazzini some 40 years earlier to involve the nations of the world in 3 world wars. Grant Richards, in The Cause of World Unrest, 1920, p. 144, comments on the Committee for Union and Progress. Indeed, I can go so far as to say that the Union for Progress was practically born in the Masonic lodge called Macedonia Risorta, established by the Salonican Jew, Immanuel Carras. Though Freemasonry was forbidden in Turkey, there were 2 lodges in Salonika under the Grand Orient of Italy. Matthias Hasberger, in Experience in the Great War, stresses that the Grand Orient of Italy was completely under the control of the Grand Orient of France. He refers to the transfer of 700,000 francs from Paris to Rome between the Grand Orients on behalf of the Jewish Charitable Trust, Alliance Israelite Universelle. This is the funding which was provided for the assassination at Sarajevo. McCurdy's, The Truth About the Secret Treaties, 1925, quotes on page 45 the article published in 1914, after Vivordan, by Oljuba Jovanović, President of the Serbian Parliament and Minister of Education. I do not remember if it were the end of May or beginning of June when one day, M. Basic told us that certain persons were preparing to go to Sarajevo, in order to kill Franz Ferdinand, who was expected there on Vivordan, Sunday, June 28. He told this much to us and others, but he acted further in the office only with Stefan Pratic, then Minister of the Interior. This was prepared by a society of secretly organized men. Pratic and the whole cabinet of Serbia knew of the plot. King Alexander, the Russian minister Hartwig, and the Russian military attaché Artmanov were in on the plot. M. Basic's nephew was a member of the Black Hand. He was the link between Pratic and the conspirators. The agent of the Black Hand in Sarajevo was Gacinovic. The Black Hand, where the murder plans had long been laid, was known by and encouraged by the government of Serbia. Princip confessed that it was through Siganovic that they had been referred to Major Tankosic, supplied with weapons, and given shooting lessons. After the Salonika trial, the Basic government sent Siganovic, as a reward for his services, to America with a false passport under the name of Danilovic. After the war, Siganovic returned and the government gave him land near Uzakub, where he then resided. Dmitrievich, who was chief of intelligence, who led in the assassination of King Alexander and the Queen in 1903, was executed in Salonika in 1918 to silence him about Sarajevo. Thus there were many persons, both conspirators and highly placed government officials, who knew well in advance of the coming assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Probably no one among them wished to interfere with the plot, because of the certainty of immediate retaliation. There were many Freemasons in government circles throughout Europe who also must have been informed of the plot. No doubt they awaited the outcome with great anticipation. Once Ferdinand had been eliminated, it was but a matter of a few days to launch the Great War. Lord Grey, British Foreign Minister, wrote in his book, 25 Years, v. 2. p. 25, if matters had rested with him, the Kaiser, there would have been no European war arising out of the Austro-Serbian dispute. This would seem to deny the oft-repeated charge that it was Kaiser Wilhelm who insisted on the war. It also may explain why he was never tried as a war criminal, despite repeated demands that such a trial be held. Such statements as Gray's, who, after all, was his enemy, would have exonerated him. Lord Fisher, First Lord of the Admiralty, stated in the London Magazine, January 1920, the nation was fooled into the war. This statement would also belly the war guilt of the Kaiser. The urgency to involve the United States in direct participation in World War I was required so that the Canaanites would acquire the necessary authority to inflict even more oppressive laws against the people of Shem. In 1916, 54% of the American people were of German origin. A vote to make German the official language of the Republic had failed by only one vote during the formation of the Republic. During the first 100 years of this nation, German was the only language to be heard in many areas. A poll in 1916 asked of the American people, if we should enter the war, would you choose to go in on the side of Germany, or of England? An overwhelming majority responded that they preferred to enter the war on the side of Germany. This was hardly surprising. England's policies, her interference, and her continual attempts to destroy the American Republic were no secret to the American people, despite the efforts of our historians to gloss over or cover up these campaigns. Pro-British groups such as the Pilgrims, the English Union, and other well-financed operations in the New York area poured forth British propaganda, but it had little or no effect on the rest of the nation. There was as yet no conceivable reason for the United States to involve itself on behalf